The boardroom of the Meridian Arts Foundation smelled like old money and a cover-up that had run 22 years too long. Ethan Cole stood at the head of the mahogany table in a charcoal suit, a flash drive between two fingers, 5 board members watching him with the particular stillness of people who had just understood that the ground beneath them was not solid. 2 federal agents stood by the far door. Marcus Webb, senior board director, founding member, the man who had spent 3 weeks calling Ethan the bookkeeper in the tone people use when they mean something they will not say out loud, sat frozen at the opposite end of the table. His expensive suit had not changed. Everything else about him had. Allison Romero sat to Ethan's left, composed, white-knuckled, the kind of still that comes not from calm, but from the decision to hold yourself together until it is finished. Board Chair Dr. Patricia Voss leaned forward. "Mr. Cole, how did you know where to look?" Ethan set the flash drive on the table. The final 48 hours had been the sharpest work of his life, but the foundation had taken 21 days to build, one careful layer at a time. "The numbers," he said, "they always tell the truth." Cut to 21 days earlier. His alarm went off at 5:14 a.m., 11 minutes before Maya needed to wake up. 11 minutes of dark and quiet in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pilsen where the radiator knocked and the window above the kitchen sink had a crack he'd sealed with weather stripping tape last November. He used those 11 minutes to make her lunch, turkey on wheat, apple slices, a note he folded into a triangle the way she liked, and to let himself think about Diane without letting it pull him under. Diane had been gone 3 years and 4 months. Ovarian cancer. She was 36. Maya had just turned 4. Some mornings Ethan still heard her voice before he was fully awake, still reached across the bed before remembering. He did not linger in that space. There were things to do. He had $847 in checking, $62 in savings. A forensic accounting contract through his agency paying $38 an hour, no benefits, no guarantee of renewal. Maya needed new shoes. Her left sneaker was separating at the sole, and she had grown half an inch since September. The math was not comfortable. It never was. He did the math anyway and moved forward. And the Meridian Arts Foundation assignment had come through on a Friday afternoon. A minor discrepancy in the Q3 disbursement logs. Standard language for something that had already grown past minor and needed a contractor to examine it at a distance, so the institution could calibrate how bad the news was before deciding what to do with it. Ethan had taken the job because it was the job available. He packed his laptop bag, put on his good jacket, and dropped Maya at Jefferson Elementary at 7:52. "You gonna find the bad guys today, Daddy?" She ate cereal with the concentration of someone performing a complex task, her gap-toothed smile surfacing briefly between bites. "I'm going to follow the numbers," he told her. She nodded like those were the same thing, because in his experience, they were. He took the 38 bus downtown. Here when he walked through the Meridian's glass lobby carrying his laptop bag and a fresh legal pad, the receptionist at the front desk looked up, looked past him, and then looked again. The specific recalibration Ethan had been reading in rooms since he was 9 years old on scholarship at a private school where his mother ironed his uniform every night because they only had one. "Contractor entrance is around back." Flat. Informational. "I'm the forensic accountant, Ethan Cole." His voice was level, not warm, not cold, just the temperature of a fact. A pause carrying the weight of a reassessment. "I'll let Ms. Romero know." Allison met him in the lobby herself, a detail that told him something. She was 47, precise in the way of someone who had earned every room she had ever stood in. Oh, her handshake direct and without performance. She walked him through the discrepancy in clipped, efficient language. She knew her numbers. She was also clearly operating under a pressure she had not fully disclosed. They were standing at the reception desk, going through the preliminary figures when Marcus Webb came through the main entrance. He was 63, broad-shouldered, with the unearned ease of a man who had navigated every room in his life as a known quantity. He stopped when he saw Ethan. His eyes moved from Allison to Ethan and back to Allison in a single sweep. The kind of assessment that does not announce itself and does not need to. Allison, her name used like a question mark. I thought we were bringing in Kellerman and Associates. We retained an independent forensic specialist. Allison's voice did not shift by a single register. Ethan Cole, highly recommended. Marcus looked at Ethan the way certain men look at other men, not hostile enough to be named in a report, just a particular quality of looking that communicates. I have already categorized you, and I do not expect to revise that assessment. Is this your first foundation audit? Casual. The word first doing significant work. No. Ethan kept his voice at the temperature of a fact. Good experience to have. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, not a handshake, and moved past. Over his shoulder, already walking away. Allison, have your assistant pull the Q3 numbers before 3. He was gone before either of them could respond. Allison turned, her jaw set. I apologize. Don't. Ethan picked up his laptop bag. Where's the server room? 2 hours into the archive files, he had already found 3 anomalies that made the back of his neck tighten. Shell companies. Wire transfers routed through vendor accounts with names that sounded institutional but resolved to nothing when he cross-referenced the state business registry. But it was the internal memo he found in the shared executive folder, sent from Marcus Webb's account 40 minutes after their encounter in the lobby, that shifted the investigation from discrepancy to deliberate. Subject line, Re-Consultant Competency Concerns. The body, not sure the contractor Allison hired has the institutional knowledge for a project of this scope. Recommend we loop in Kellerman before this becomes a liability. No specifics, no name, just the architecture of a move being made. Ethan saved a copy to his encrypted local drive. Then he went back to the numbers. At 2:47, Allison appeared in the server room doorway with 2 cups of terrible break room coffee and a look that meant she had been deciding something. He does that, she said, setting a cup beside his keyboard. The shoulder. The assistant. He's done it to 3 contractors in the past 18 months. Ethan looked up from the screen. Were they all different backgrounds, all gone within their first month? She held his gaze steadily, a woman placing information where it could be used. You found something. Not a question. I found several things, he said, but I need to know whether it's isolated or a pattern. Give me tonight. It took 4 hours and 40 minutes. By 11 p.m., he had mapped what he could only call an architecture, not an error, not even simple embezzlement, but a deliberate structure built across multiple institutions over years. Shell companies, offshore accounts, layered vendor contracts resolving to entities that did not exist in any state registry. He pulled the list of affected foundations, cross-referencing Marcus's board affiliations against the audit histories. 7 foundations. The Meridian was the 8th. 73 cases, 6 years, $3.2 million unaccounted for. And in every single institution, Marcus had personally recommended the external auditor, meaning he had controlled who looked, meaning he had controlled what they found. Ethan pulled up the Meridian's own audit records, the firm listed at the top of every previous report, Kellerman and Associates. He set his pen down carefully. Then he picked it up again and wrote one line at the top of a fresh legal pad. This is not a discrepancy. This is a system. He was pulling on his jacket to leave when he found it. A single file in the archive folder, buried under a sequence of dated vendor contracts. Cole_EJ_background check_2019. His name, his agency's letterhead. A background check pulled 6 years ago when Ethan had applied to audit a nonprofit called the Hargrove Cultural Center. He had not gotten that contract. His agency told him the client had gone another direction. Marcus Webb had been on the Hargrove board in 2019. He had not simply dismissed Ethan in the lobby 3 weeks ago. He had seen Ethan's name on a contractor list 6 years ago and ensured the door was closed before Ethan could reach it. This was not a reaction, and this was a pattern that had started long before Ethan walked through the Meridian's glass doors. But here was what Marcus Webb did not know. Ethan had kept every document from every job he had ever been passed over for. Every single one. A filing system built not from bitterness, but from the disciplined understanding that in his field, documentation was the only currency that could not be devalued by someone else's opinion of him. He closed the laptop. He looked at the legal pad. Tomorrow, he would need to know exactly how deep this went. And he already knew the answer was going to be deeper than Marcus Webb had ever imagined anyone would be willing to look. The automated text from Jefferson Elementary arrived at 6:47 a.m., 3 days into the investigation, while Ethan was cross-referencing the second shell company's routing number against federal banking records. Incident report filed. Please contact the school office before 9 a.m. He was there by 8:15. The assistant principal, a tired woman named Mrs. Okafor, explained it with the practiced neutrality of someone who had delivered this kind of information too many times. Another student had told Maya during lunch that her father probably worked in a kitchen because people like him didn't work in offices downtown. 7 years old. Both of them 7 years old. And one of them had already absorbed enough of the world to deploy it as a weapon. Maya was sitting in the hallway outside the office on a plastic chair, her backpack on her lap, her posture holding something careful. When Ethan crouched down in front of her, she looked at him with her mother's directness, the kind that did not flinch and did not perform. "I told him you find where money goes when people steal it," she said. He didn't know what that meant. Ethan stayed at her eye level for a long moment. The right response was not reassurance, and it was not rage. It was the truth, offered steadily. "He will someday. Come on, you're not in trouble." He walked her back to class, stood outside the door until he heard her voice join the noise of the room, and then stood in the corridor for 30 additional seconds doing something he refused to call grieving. Then he went back to work. What Ethan did not know, and would only reconstruct weeks later from deposition transcripts and recovered emails, was what Marcus Webb was doing at that precise hour. Marcus was in his 14th floor office on a call with Gerald Kellerman, the founding partner of Kellerman and Associates, a man whose firm had served as the designated auditor for every institution Marcus had ever controlled. The tone of the call, according to his assistant who later testified under oath, was controlled but stripped of its usual ease. "He's not a bookkeeper, Gerald. He's actually looking." Kellerman's response was immediate and procedural. File a formal competency challenge, route it through Douglas Pratt in HR, Cite failure to report preliminary findings through proper institutional channels. By a week. Contain it. Douglas Pratt had been the Meridian's HR liaison for 9 years. In that time, he had received 61 formal workplace complaints. Not one had reached the Foundation's executive board. 2 of the complainants had been black contractors. Both engagements had ended within their first 30 days of service. Pratt processed complaints the way a drain processes water, efficiently, invisibly, in a direction that served the existing structure. Marcus made the call to Pratt at 10:03 a.m. He had no way of knowing that Ethan had already pulled the complete HR complaint archive 11 days earlier and saved it to an encrypted partition on his local drive. He had no way of knowing because he had spent 22 years operating inside an assumption that the people he underestimated were not paying attention. It was not arrogance, exactly. It was something more durable and therefore more dangerous. It was institutional habit. Systems that work long enough begin to believe in their own permanence. Ethan worked through permanence the way he worked through everything else, methodically. Day 4, he cross-referenced all 3 shell company names: Apex Logistics, Meridian Consulting Partners, Horizon View Advisors, LLC, against Secretary of State business registries across Illinois, Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming. 2 of the 3 returned no registered entity anywhere in the United States. The 3rd was registered to a post office box in the Cayman Islands through a nominee structure that traced back, after 3 additional steps, to a trust account opened in Marcus Webb's wife's maiden name in 2003. Day 6. He located the Foundation's IT administrator, a quiet man named Cal, who worked the server room with the methodical focus of someone who had been flagging problems into a void for a long time. Cal had submitted 18 internal anomaly reports over 11 months. All 18 had been routed to Douglas Pratt. None had generated a response. Cal handed Ethan a flash drive containing the complete unreviewed log archive and said something Ethan would carry with him for the rest of his professional life. I kept copies because I needed someone to eventually ask. Competence, Ethan had learned, was rarely about being the most brilliant person in the room. It was about being willing to do the work that others had decided wasn't worth their time. Day 8. He found the physical ledger. It was not locked in a cabinet or secured in a safe. It was sitting on the break room bookshelf between a 2-year-old financial regulation manual and a coffee mug full of dried-out pens. Marcus had left it in plain sight because he had spent 2 decades in rooms where no one was looking carefully enough to see what was directly in front of them. Arrogance, Ethan had observed, was its own form of blindness. It convinced people that visibility required camouflage, when often it only required someone who bothered to look. The ledger contained 43 pages of handwritten entries, dates, amounts, offshore routing codes, notations in the tight, precise script of a man who trusted analog records because he believed they left no digital trail. Ethan photographed every page, cross-referenced each entry against the wire transfer records from Cal's logs, and found that 44 transfers matched on date, amount, and destination account. 44 out of 44. Days 9 and 10, he built the device fingerprint case. On the MAC address attached to each wire transfer's initiating command resolved, through the Foundation's network registration database, to a single personal tablet registered under Marcus Webb's executive credentials. The device had been physically connected to the Foundation's internal Wi-Fi during every transfer window, not remotely, not through a proxy, not via spoofed credentials. The tablet had been inside this building, in the boardroom, during the Thursday afternoon sessions that Marcus chaired. The technical term for what Ethan had constructed across those 10 days was a forensic chain of custody, an unbroken sequence of documented evidence in which every claim had a timestamp, every timestamp had a device signature, and every signature had a registered owner. The legal term for what it amounted to was federal wire fraud. It's 22 counts, with a sentencing exposure under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343 of up to 20 years per count. Ethan did not let himself feel the weight of that number. Not yet. Weight was for after. He was deep in the Civil Rights Supplemental, a secondary report he had begun constructing on day 7, documenting all 61 HR complaints, isolating the 8 involving contractors of color, and mapping the 72-hour pattern between each complaint and the subsequent dismissal when his agency called. The account manager's voice carried the particular quality of apology that means a decision has already been made by someone with more leverage than the person calling. A formal competency challenge had been filed through the Meridian's HR office, unauthorized access to restricted personnel files, a potential breach of contractor conduct standards. His server access would be suspended pending review. His contract could be terminated. Can you give me until 4 p.m. to complete the handoff protocol? Ethan kept his voice at the temperature of a routine request. If the server extraction chain is broken mid-process, the entire software suite requires a full restart, minimum 6 hours. The oversight committee would need an explanation for the delay. The pause on the other end was the sound of someone calculating institutional risk. He had 4 hours. He called Allison immediately. She already knew. Marcus had moved through 2 board members simultaneously, filing the competency complaint through HR while lobbying for a procedural vote to transfer the audit authority back to Kellerman. Her voice, when she answered, had the quality of someone holding a structure together by will alone. He's trying to pull your contract. I know. Allison, I need you to go to the boardroom and stay there. Don't let anyone near the main server terminal. A silence that was not hesitation, but decision. Okay. He used 3 hours and 51 minutes of his 4-hour window. He isolated the network log directory and the wire transfer records inside a 256-bit encrypted partition, locked behind a key that existed only on his local drive. Then he compiled the complete evidentiary package: the financial fraud documentation, the ledger photographs, the device fingerprint analysis, Cal's log archive, the 47-page Civil Rights Supplemental citing 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 by section and subsection, and transmitted it to the DOJ Financial Crimes Division at 1:17 p.m. The case agent called back at 2:44. Her voice had the particular stillness of a professional encountering something that exceeded their standard intake criteria. Mr. Cole, this is the most complete, unsolicited forensic package we have received from a private contractor in over a decade. Ethan wrote down everything she needed from him for the next 48 hours. He did not tell her that completing it had required working 17-hour days for 3 weeks on a contract that paid $38 an hour with no benefits. Some costs were not relevant to the record. They were simply the price of doing the work right. He arranged extended care for Maya, called his sister in Atlanta, and then sat for 4 minutes in the server room in the quiet of the Meridian building, listening to the cooling fans and thinking about nothing in particular. Sometimes the mind needed a moment to register what the hands had built. That evening, he picked Maya up at 6:30. She had a water cycle model for the science fair due in 2 weeks, a plastic bin, a heat lamp, a careful diagram she had drawn herself in colored pencil. She explained the evaporation process with the unselfconscious authority of someone who had been thinking about it for days, and Ethan listened all the way home and made pasta with butter and the parmesan she called fancy cheese, and sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching her eat with something that was not quite relief and not quite peace, but was somewhere in the territory between them. After dinner, in the particular quiet that followed clearing the plates, she looked at him across the table. Is the bad guy going to get away with it? Ethan thought about 44 wire transfers, a ledger left in plain sight, a flash drive delivered to the DOJ at 1:17 p.m. He thought about Cal, who had kept copies for 11 months waiting for someone to ask. He thought about 73 contractors and the specific cost of being underestimated by people who had built systems around the assumption that it would continue. No, he said. He kept his own records because he was certain no one capable of reading them would ever be allowed close enough to look. He paused. He was wrong about that. Maya processed this with the deliberate thoroughness she brought to complex information. Then, can we watch one episode before bed? One, he said. Then you sleep. At 10 p.m., see, after the apartment went quiet, he opened the document one final time. He read through the financial report, the civil rights supplemental, the federal cover memo. He added one line to the cover page, beneath the case number and the institution name. Prepared by Ethan J. Cole, Certified Forensic Accountant, license number CFA-2847-IL. He closed the laptop. He looked at the kitchen window, at the weather stripping tape over the crack, at the small, ordinary evidence of a life maintained carefully under pressure. Tomorrow, the numbers would speak for themselves. They always did. What they said depended entirely on who had been paying close enough attention to record them. The emergency board meeting convened at 10 a.m. sharp under Dr. Patricia Voss's authority, which meant it convened without an agenda distributed in advance and without Marcus Webb knowing what he was walking into. He arrived at 10:03 carrying a leather folder and the composed bearing of a man who had managed rooms like this one for 22 years. He saw Ethan at the presentation screen, and something moved behind his eyes. Not fear yet, just the first recalculation of a person realizing the geometry of the room had changed without his permission. Ethan began with the money. He walked through it the way he walked through all evidence, chronologically, without inflection, letting the data carry its own weight, because data, handled correctly, did not need assistance. August 14th, $45,000 wired to Apex Logistics, a company with no registered presence in any state business registry. September 3rd, $78,000 to Horizon View Advisors, LLC, traced to a nominee trust structure in a foreign jurisdiction opened under Marcus Webb's wife's maiden name in 2003. He placed a bound report in front of each board member as he spoke, tabbed and indexed, 44 transfers documented across 22 years with timestamps, device signatures, and account destinations. He put the network fingerprint analysis on the screen. Every transfer initiated from one device, one MAC address, one registered personal tablet belonging to Marcus Webb, connected to the Foundation's internal Wi-Fi during each transaction window, physically present inside this building, in this boardroom. During the Thursday sessions, Marcus himself had chaired. Marcus leaned forward, his voice still carrying the precision of long practice. This is a spoofing attack. An external actor using compromised internal credentials. I've raised cybersecurity concerns with this board for months. What we're looking at is the direct result of institutional negligence, not... Page 8. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The device maintained a continuous authenticated connection to the internal network from 8:47 a.m. to 4:15 p.m. on each transfer date. Not a remote intrusion, not a spoofed external signal. The tablet was in this building. He held Marcus's gaze with the flat certainty of a man who had triple verified every number before entering the room. Sitting where you are sitting now. The silence that followed had mass. Marcus shifted his approach without pausing, pivoting to Allison with the particular fluency of someone who had always found it easier to redirect than to retreat. This is a fabrication engineered by a director who retained a contractor specifically to manufacture cover for her own financial mismanagement. I raised concerns about this man's qualifications on day one. He pointed at Ethan, the gesture carrying all the dismissal of every shoulder clap and every assistant comment and every background check pulled in 2019 to close a door before Ethan could reach it. And I stand by that assessment. Ethan let the words land. Then he produced the second report. You did raise competency concerns about me on day one. He walked a copy to Dr. Voss and placed it in her hands directly. You raised the same concerns about 60 other contractors over 6 years. At the Civil Rights Supplemental behind tab 4 documents all 61 HR complaints processed by Douglas Pratt during your board tenure. Of the 8 complaints involving contractors of color, all 8 engagements ended within 30 days of the complaint being filed. The average elapsed time between your stated concern and each dismissal was 71 hours. He returned to the front of the room. The pattern holds across all 7 foundations where you held board authority, 73 contractors. The documentation is consistent, dated, and has been submitted to the DOJ under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. He reached into the folder one final time and placed a single page on the table in front of Marcus. A printout, a background check. Col_EJ_background check _2019. You saw my name on a contractor list 6 years ago when I applied to audit the Hargrove Cultural Center. You were on the Hargrove board. I didn't receive that contract. Ethan's voice dropped to the register he used when the evidence was so complete it required no volume at all. You didn't dismiss me in this lobby 3 weeks ago because you doubted my qualifications. You dismissed me because you had already tried once before, and you believed the door you closed in 2019 would stay closed. He looked at Marcus steadily. I kept every document from every position I was passed over for. Every single one. You built your system on the assumption that the people you underestimated weren't keeping records. We were. The door opened. 2 federal agents entered. Marcus looked at them. He looked at the bound reports in front of the board members. He looked at Ethan with the expression of a man arriving, finally and completely, at the understanding that he had been outworked, not outmaneuvered, not outwitted by some dramatic reversal, but simply, thoroughly, patiently outworked by someone he had never bothered to take seriously. There was no move left. The box he was in had been built from his own data, sealed with his own records, and locked with a key he had unknowingly handed over the moment he left a ledger on a break room bookshelf because he was certain no one capable of reading it would ever be allowed close enough to look. He said nothing. For the first time in 22 years, Marcus Webb had nothing left to say. By 4 p.m. the same day, Douglas Pratt was on administrative leave. E. Kellerman and Associates had its foundation certification suspended pending a separate inquiry. The board voted unanimously to retain Allison Romero as CEO and to commission an independent governance review with an external chair. Ethan filed the final chain of custody documentation from a chair in the Meridian server room at 4:47 p.m., forwarded the encryption key to the lead federal agent, and closed his laptop. Allison found him there. She stood in the doorway for a moment. The composed executive exterior was present but different now, the way a building looks different after you have watched it survive a storm. She crossed the room and sat down across from him in the same chair she had occupied on day one, when she had set a cup of terrible coffee beside his keyboard and told him the truth about what he was walking into. "Why, you didn't just fix the books." Her voice carrying something that had moved past professional gratitude into the territory of one person genuinely witnessing another. "You stood in front of all of it and you didn't move." Ethan looked at her across the narrow space of the server room. He was relying on the room to do his work for him, he said. Rooms like that one have been doing his work for 22 years. I just made sure this one didn't. She held his gaze, and what passed between them in that silence was the specific recognition of two people who had carried the same weight through the same narrow passage and come out the other side still standing. Allison reached across the desk and covered his hand with hers, briefly, firmly, not a performance, not a prologue, just the acknowledgement of a shared cost. Then she straightened. Hummy and they both went back to the work of closing things properly. 8 months later, the DOJ investigation had formally expanded to all 7 foundations. A federal grand jury had returned indictments on 19 counts and new procurement guidelines, requiring independent forensic review for any federally funded institution receiving over $500,000 annually, had been drafted and submitted to the relevant oversight committees. 41 of the 73 affected contractors had been located and connected with legal representation for civil rights claims. The Meridian, under Allison's direction, became the first institution to establish a proactive reparative settlement fund. The guidelines, informally, carried Ethan's name. He had asked only that they be written in plain language, accessible to people without accounting backgrounds. And they were. Ethan was the Meridian's first permanent chief financial officer. The offer letter had been signed by Dr. Voss and countersigned by Allison and processed through proper HR channels in a manner that Douglas Pratt, who was no longer employed there, had no part in. Ethan's savings account held $4,200. Maya had new shoes with proper arch support and a water cycle model that had placed third in the district science fair, a result her teacher described in a text message as delivered with the confidence of a tenured professor. Ethan had read that message 11 times. He did not count how many times after 11. On a Saturday in late October, he took her to the lakefront. The light was low and gold across the water, the kind of afternoon that felt like a margin note written into an otherwise difficult year. Maya ran ahead of him on the path, her arms out, her new shoes flashing, calling back over her shoulder that he was too slow. He was not too slow. He had simply learned, across 22 years of closed doors and careful records and work that no one had expected him to complete, that the most important things were not built quickly. They were built correctly. One number at a time, one document at a time, one steady, unspectacular day at a time, until the structure was so solid that not even the people who had spent decades denying its possibility could argue with what it had become. He ran to catch up with his daughter,